Good evening and welcome to Techdenkers. I see a few familiar faces. Welcome again. Welcome to the people at home. I'm Rosalie Dielsen. I'm the program editor here at the Balie. And for the past 2 years, I've had the privilege of developing this program series in collaboration with Agen, Techdenkers, to explore the influence of technology on democracy. Well, this topic, of course, feels more urgent than ever with the recent elections in the US, also in other countries, as well as President-elect Donald Trump appointing Elon Musk as a candidate for Department of Government Efficiency, and, of course, the ongoing debates around tech governance and power dynamics. In September, we hosted the renowned author and policy expert Marietje Schaake, where we examined the influence of big tech on Europe and the global consequences of unchecked digital power. In November, we welcomed Anil Seth, who, according to The Guardian, is one of the most influential people on consciousness right now. And today, I'm of course honored to welcome Meredith Whittaker. She's the president of Signal and a staunch advocate for privacy and ethical technology. Together, we'll explore the critical importance of privacy in a world increasingly shaped by pervasive surveillance and the dominance of tech giants. But of course, Techdenkers would not be Techdenkers if we wouldn't start with you, the audience. So I have a few questions. The first question would be, who has Signal on their phone? Maybe the easiest question. A lot of people. Okay, well, I'm happy to see that. I have also another question, which is maybe a devil's dilemma, but where would you rather have your data lie? With the government or with big tech? So, government? Big tech? Is there an option C? Both. Why both? I'm gonna walk to you because I'm curious as well.
Whoever you put your trust in, so I will trust both is my choice.
Does everyone think that? Do they trust both? Oh, no? Okay, see another.
Yeah, I do trust both, and I think something similar also happened quite a while ago, and I specifically think there is a book called The Life of Henrietta Lacks, and she is the lady who had pancreatic cancer, and her stem cell got developed into quite a lot of things, and during that time, our things like our saliva or urine, that also had similar importance like data has nowadays, whose property is that. So, evolution went through a similar discussion almost 30, 40 years ago. So I think data would also become like that in near future.
Thank you for sharing. Are you curious about anything tonight? A certain topic, maybe?
Definitely. I would like to hear different viewpoints. There is no right or wrong, I think, on this, but I am curious to know, different ideas, thoughts, and things like that.
Thank you so much. Then, without further ado, I would really like to welcome the speakers. Of course, Meredith Whittaker. She's the president of Signal, and I'll go here for the light, and a renowned expert on the social implications of artificial intelligence and the tech industry's power dynamics. She co-founded the AI Now Institute and previously spent over a decade at Google, where she led engineering teams, founded the Open Research Group, and co-created MLab, the largest open data platform on internet performance. And Meredith has advised organizations including the White House, the FCC, and the European Parliament on AI, internet policy, privacy, and security. I would also like to introduce the moderator, Yuri Albrecht, director of the Balie, and after studying history, philosophy, and international law at Leiden University, he moved to Oxford to study European politics. And at Oxford, he learned from figures such as Isaiah Berlin, George Steiner, and Peter Polzer. He then became a junior dean where he taught both history and philosophy. A warm welcome. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rosalie, for that introduction. That's weird, being introduced here in the Balie. Thank you very much, Rosalie, and wonderful to have you here, Meredith Whittaker. We're really terribly happy that you're here, for many reasons. And one of them is that you're so outspoken and so clear on many of the things we encounter today in our democracies. So it's a great privilege that you're here. I think also there's something we share as the Balie Foundation and the Signal Foundation, that we do really care about democracy, rule of law and the rights of citizens to express themselves in the way they want. And I think we're small and you're very big in that. So, but that's one of the reasons we're really happy that you're here and you made the way over all the way from Paris. Maybe to start with that. I do believe everybody here knows what Signal is, because almost everybody in the room uses it. But maybe to start with that, you transferred to Paris your, and I was wondering why? You traveled in from Paris, why?
Have you been to Paris?
Yeah.
That's not the answer. But you said we're big. I think we're both, as you, maybe to put it in American parlance, we're both legit about what we believe. We're not pasting marketing slogans on the side of a pernicious business model. And then you said Signal's big, and Signal is big by some metrics. It is, used by hundreds of millions of people around the globe. It's core infrastructure for critical work across, every domain, from boardrooms to human rights work to journalism. I think pretty obvious to folks in this room. But we're also really small, as measured by other axes, and one of those axes is number of people who work on Signal. So we're up there with the the WhatsApps, the iMessages. We're having to carry similar burdens, do similar engineering work, but they have thousands and thousands of people, not even counting the contract workers who augment that workforce, and we have 50 total.
Total. Yeah.
So that's a lead into the answer of why Paris, because we are a global platform. Communications networks don't work if they stop at jurisdictional boundaries or organizational boundaries. And we are very invested in making sure that everyone everywhere in the world can connect with anyone else on Signal, and the European market and the European regulatory regimes are very interesting to us in that regard. So it was easier than flying from New York to Europe all the time. Thank you.
There will be ample room for applause, I think, but this is a good start. So you think it's the regulatory institutions in Europe are better than America? Is that what you said?
I didn't say better. I said they are
interesting to you.
They're interesting. They're active. They're fomenting. And there is, in particular, there are some very interesting laws, such as the mandate for end-to-end encryption that Germany is considering for communications. That's something we would, support if implemented well. And then there are some very dangerous laws, like the chat controls law that has been, it's just this endlessly repackaged zombie that is effectively working to mandate a backdoor in end-to-end encryption, but under the rubric of protecting children, which is a very difficult debate to engage in.
Yeah, you protested earlier this year against the union.
I guess, we were just very clear and empirical on the stakes here. This is a catastrophic cybersecurity vulnerability in the middle of the core infrastructure we have for private communications in the world, in an age where surveillance is pervasive over almost all facets of life. It's not a good idea. So, yeah, that is protest, but that's also just raising empirics up into a debate that has been owned by lobbyists and owned by rhetoric and owned by some factions of law enforcement that don't quite understand a holistic self-interest and are thus willing to undermine even their own security to broaden their surveillance apparatus.
Do you find that you could talk to the European Union? Because there's always a complaint that there's no number, there's no one phone which you can phone the European Union. But do you because you've interacted with those kind of institutions in the United States, do you think Brussels is sort of approachable for your ideas or for your protest or for your?
I think so. I mean, I don't know. There is no number. There's so many people in Brussels.
Yeah,
it's so confusing. Yeah. Every time I think I understand it, they change it slightly and another word comes into the picture and I have to learn, the trilogue happens then, okay. So I'm not a Brussels expert. What I do know is that when we talk to them, when we sort of draft up our points, it seems to resonate with a number of the people that we are in touch with. And there is at least an understanding, among some MEPs and others we talk to in Brussels of the seriousness of this issue.
Yeah.
Now, it hasn't died, but, it's at least, we're kind of killing the zombie. We get a good night's sleep, then the zombie revives and we have to do it again. And that, that's not just this chat controls debate. That's we can start in 1976 when Whit Diffie and Martin Hellman tried to publish the paper that documented public key cryptography, and the US government freaked out and tried to prevent that publication.
Why did they want to prevent that?
Because post-World War II, and with the rise in computational research and the reliance on computational networks, there'd been an kind of a closing down of cryptography as a government secret. So there were export controls in place, and there was a general allergy and anxiety about the idea that there could ever be a communications network that wasn't interceptable by the government. And as such, you couldn't have encryption in the public domain because that would allow, the theory is, and I think we can get into how correct this theory is in an era where we aren't really the decision makers here, but nonetheless, the theory was that if encryption was, if we could build and deploy encryption, we would be creating networks that would not be interceptable, and that was something that was causing a lot of anxiety. So this followed the development of network computation through to the early 90s, and then blew up in the 90s as the Clinton administration and the world was sort of focused on commercializing the internet. And the question really being like, okay, we need encryption for commerce, right? You can't put your credit card number into a website and buy something that a targeted ad is selling you in a commercial internet if you don't have some way of encrypting, if you don't have some way of authentication. But we don't want encryption for interpersonal communication. We don't want it to hide things we want to see. We want it to protect business. And I think that was the tension that kind of blew up into what we call the crypto wars, which is this series of policy and other battles throughout the 90s that ended in the liberalization of encryption.
So it was quite visionary that they were against it, you would say. It was not just random. There were really sort of a vision behind what the United States wanted for business development, for...
I think let's not call it a vision, let's call it an objective function. That just sort of, they may not have all known or been self-aware of the imperative they were working to, but nonetheless, the thrust was in we want to retain the power we have, with information asymmetry being a big, part of codifying that kind of power. And thus, there were all these, key escrow, the Clipper chip, there were all these sort of tricks and traps that were proposed to try to, make a magical solution that would give them both access and allow encryption to be robust. We still see that. That's, it's literally just on repeat, warmed over leftovers in the chat control debate. But nonetheless, it's this, we can see that anxiety and the way it continues to manifest. This isn't a technical debate, really. This is a debate about who has power, who has fundamental rights, and what the thresholds of, it's not just governments, right? Sort of, governments, corporations, and those who have power over us, our employers, border police, et cetera. What should be the thresholds for rights preservation, even in the face of these entities that have power over our lives and institutions?
Yeah, because one of the questions Rosalind asked was, do you trust your data with government or with big business or big tech? And then you said, don't trust the false dichotomy.
I did. I couldn't help it.
No, that's great. I mean, you're allowed to say.
Yeah.
So why? Why is that? Because that taps into this discussion.
I mean, trust is earned, right? Trust is earned. Why, and it's broken easily. I also think those taxonomical categories are already too big. I don't trust big tech. I know the incentives that are driving them, the imperatives that they are sort of working under, and I think their business model is fundamentally untrustworthy. I don't trust government as a form. I've seen good people in government. I've seen government that ravages people, that implements cruelty, that has bureaucratic harm. I don't those aren't categories that I can actually work with in any meaningful or specific way. What I do know is the type of power constituted in the large tech companies, which in our context are jurisdictioned in the U.S. You have the Chinese and U.S. tech poles, but really we're talking about the U.S. in the Western context. The type of power hasn't been seen in this form in history, right? You have something analogous maybe with the Catholic Church in the Middle Ages, but what you have is you have massive amounts of surveillance data, massive amounts of information, on global populations, about our lives, our institutions, our friends.
So you're saying that
And-
those 5 or 6, or maybe, no, it doesn't really matter, but 2.
Yeah, the
big-
clouds plus the platforms, yeah.
The big tech cloud, the cloud platforms, that they have unprecedented power. We've not seen something like that in history.
And again,
And maybe that's true for some of the Chinese as
this
well.
is an unprecedented form of power. You know, we just haven't seen this digital reach across the world before. We haven't seen our information ecosystem pooled in the hands of, you know, it's 5 platforms, 4 jurisdictions in the US. You know, the levers of control over, you know, what we see, what type of content exists is, you know, in the hands of a vanishingly small and wildly homogenous population that are sort of impelled by profit and growth and not necessarily like making sure we have a healthy information diet. That's we have, you know, the cloud platforms, 70%, 70, of the global market is in the hands of Amazon, Microsoft, and Google. That means your government runs on one of those, right? Your university runs on one of those. You know, it's not, you know, this conversation around sovereignty gets really threadbare when we look at infrastructure. And then you have this sort of AI, both the mythology and the reality of what we're talking about when we talk about AI in this moment, which are these, you know, large kind of scaling laws, models that can only really be created and deployed by those same companies, given their, you know, data monopolies, given their massive amounts of compute that they're able to cross-subsidize, they're able to, you know, buy and build out. And importantly, and I think this gets left out of the conversation, their market access, right? You can get some money, train a model on a supercomputer, like get a little prize, but then how do you use it? How do you make money for it? You license it to a cloud company like Mistral, and they sell it out as an API access, as some sort of, you know, part of a cloud deal. That's their, like, you know, shiny thing to attract customers. Or you do something maybe open source or what have you, and, you know, Meta, who is very core to the development of PyTorch, which is one of the key frameworks for developing these models, then like integrates it into their platform, which touches billions of users and allows them to optimize ads or whatever, right? But again, that market access is really key in understanding this, and it's not something that is evenly distributed across states. So yeah, I feel safe in making that contestation that we
I
haven't
entirely
seen
see what you mean, but it's an interesting idea.
Yeah.
Because history is long. I'm an historian.
Yeah.
History is quite long, and it's ominous as well, of course, because it's if you and the Catholic Church might have done some good and some bad, but if you compare to these sort of power things which we hardly ever seen in history, that's ominous, of course. That's might even be threatening. That might even be very, very dangerous. And but on the other hand, just to make it a little bit clearer, I'm an historian. I'm interested in the rise of the nation state, among other things. That's what I did study. And I'm not too happy about nation state. So I understand your sort of... So you're saying jurisdiction, and you could say, well, you know, this is a way, these global companies, to overcome sort of this sort of error or of the idea of the nation state, because more people got killed by their own governments than by enemy governments, if you statistically look at it. So it's quite a dangerous idea. So it might overcome sort of the nationalist jurisdiction idea.
I mean, I'm not a historian of the nation state. I've read some very interesting work that shows the sort of Westphalian model is much more recent than we've historicized, and this, we're kind of, reaching a little there. But
sure.
What I'm invested in here is not what we call it necessarily. A monopoly on violence backed by national power is significant, and that's a form we have to pay attention to and not collapse into every other. But nonetheless, what I'm invested in here is centralized power, right? How much power can you pool in the hands of how few people? And then how tempting is that configuration of resources and affordances that constitutes that power to, as a political weapon, right? And that's my argument around these platforms. I'm like, maybe they're governed in the most benevolent way. The Council of the Wise Elders gets around and yada, yada. They're obviously not, right? But that's kind of a liberal imaginary that floats a lot of really bad laws, frankly. But it doesn't matter if today they're governed that way. That type of power will never not be tempting to those who want to misuse it. Like control over media has been tempting to oligarchs, dictators, authoritarians, businesses for, since media existed. You have Western Union during the rise of the telegraph in the US refusing to send telegraph messages sent by a political candidate that they didn't agree with, right? You have, constantly the co-optation of media. You have Hearst in the U.S. Sorry, my history is mainly U.S.-based because that's where I came up. But nonetheless, this is a theme we can trace back, right? The power constitutes itself by controlling our information, by controlling us, getting surveillance data, using it for coercion or manipulation or what have you. And then, of course, if you have an on-off switch for national infrastructures for critical functions, that's also a really key source of power. So,
And there is an on-off switch for our critical.
I mean, effectively, right? You black hole the BGP tables for, your region and it's off, right? Or you say, Ukraine is sanctioned, they can no longer, this is a hypothetical, right? I'm just, Ukraine is now a sanctioned company. They can no longer license AWS. So where do those drone APIs go, right? Like, yes, they do have it's not a literal like red button, but it's the apparatus that could produce that fairly easily.
So we're not boycotting the Russians actually because we could switch them off.
I don't know what that means.
I mean, I understood that there is a boycott going on, international boycott, because the Russians are attacking Ukraine. Sort of that a lot of, but we could easily switch them off.
Who's we though?
We, we the West, the big tech firms could switch off the Russian army.
I don't know. I mean, probably there is some. I don't know Russia's reliance on the big tech firms, but I'm using the subjunctive, right? It's underlined here. I think Russia has some, tech industry. They have Yandex and some companies. They don't mirror the U.S. and Chinese big companies, but yes, and they could switch off the Netherlands, right?
Yeah, that's for sure.
And they could switch off, Germany or whoever, right? It's the subjunctive spans 70% of the globe.
And so you're saying power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolute?
That's not my quote. I didn't say that.
No, that's not your quote.
I think a man said that.
Yeah. That's a quote from Harold Acton, actually. But the power you yield as a tech company, as one of those clouds, is too tempting. It will eventually lead to abuse.
Sure, yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know why I'm hesitating to like fully agree with that. I'm just like, I think, I think we can get under the surface of that a little bit and say, when did we agree that they have a right to classify us to begin with, right? Like there's actually, there's a level that we don't have this conversation, and I'm gonna be giving a talk at, anyone go to Chaos Communications Congress after Christmas? Anyway, I'll be there during the time where my parents have no idea why they'd hold a conference. And I'm giving a talk with it sort of wrestling with some of this, but really like when we talk about privacy, we talk about, it often stops at the point of talking about data ownership and data flows, right? And so there's this debate right now happening around like, okay, well, if you have an AI model that's on your device and the data that it does inference over never leaves your device, then we can call that private, right? And that's really uncomfortable because that's actually, there's a form of control and classificatory authority that's a really weird phrase, but that exists in that paradigm that I don't think we should just willingly accept. And it's really that, if we're talking, say, about iOS and Apple, right? As an example, and they put an AI model on our device, they're like, the data never leaves your device, it's just doing inference on your device, which is, basically it's making suggestions and prompts and sort of reading things and, helping. And then, that right now is classified as private in a fairly large debate. But why is it okay for Apple to decide what that model does to begin with? Why is it okay to be classified by a large company whose, the answers, the questions that are asked, that the data answers, are questions that are motivated by profit and growth and the imperatives of these companies. They don't actually reflect our consciousness. They don't reflect the organizations of our, social lives. They don't reflect the possibility of other worlds. And I think there is we really have to wrestle with the epistemic authority that has been taken by these actors and denaturalize data as some sort of natural off-gas of our lives and institutions. It's not. It's constructed about us to classify us in ways that are convenient to those who create data. And I think there's a deeper understanding of privacy that actually has to push back on the notion that that data is accurate at all, that it should exist at all, and that consent means that people should be able to determine which category we go into, like the right to self-determination and the right not to be classified from above.
Yeah, that's very well put, but it's not the fact that it's deeper. The fact is, the problem lies deeper than just the fact that they collect your data and it's your data. The fact that we accept that we're being classified as such.
Or I would say it's not my data. You made it up about me.
Right.
You have no idea who I am. You are not invited to my house. You would never know, right?
No.
Like, how on earth am I accepting this version of myself as if it were natural, and then as if I want to own it and parcel it out as, mine? I reject it, right? And that's not to say data is useless and we should live in a world of, like mushy categories in which nothing can be named. That's to say that I think I'm going to sidebar, but it's going to come back. So
Please,
one of the
please do.
reasons I
Yeah,
know and
yeah.
love Amsterdam is because I used to be at the RIPE NCC a lot. I was on their program committee, and I worked with a lot of like networking and low-level folks because I ran Measurement Lab, which was this large measurement platform that was trying to measure network performance, like how the internet worked, like TCP round trip time as a proxy for performance. And that was a really simple idea when I co-founded it. And the idea there was like, we need a benchmark against which net neutrality can be measured. Because neutrality in a vacuum isn't something we can actually enforce or really talk about. It's a good concept, like, we shouldn't be censoring the type of content that runs over networks, but nonetheless, we don't really have a way of defining that, so it's not really useful in policy debates. It's not precise. So, okay, let's set up a bunch of nodes. Let's do this whole thing. Let's have open measurement, so we have data that can be validated, that is robust, that we can put into the ecosystem as a source, for researchers and as a benchmark that we can then work with as we determine how we classify this and how we set regulations. That seemed real, like I was like, cool, why hasn't anyone thought of this? And that meant I spent years wrestling with like the mushiness of data creation, like determining the methodology, but do you do TCP round trip time? Do you do good put or throughput? And I actually don't recall exactly what the difference was, but it was important because the numbers would be different. Because the ISPs, who were sort of on the other side of Google, the internet service providers like telecom and whoever, wanted those numbers to be higher because that made them look better and more neutral. Google wanted those numbers to be lower because that allowed them to argue for reclassification and other measures that effectively let their traffic ride over these telcos networks with less cost to them. Ultimately, that was the stakes of a debate that was wrapped in a lot of moral language that I really bought into at the beginning, and some of those values I still really hold dear. But I think it was not as good faith as I thought. Anyway. It was so hard, even at that level, to make data that was a robust proxy for reality, right? Like you would have a kernel upgrade that came along with a new version of Linux that we ran on our server platforms, and that would dramatically change how TCP dumps were being processed, which meant the data was totally different, which meant that month to month it wasn't fungible, which meant that we were then being fought at the FCC and the sort of telecom regulators that this data is inaccurate. And I was having to come up with like methodologies of how do we justify that this is actually real so we don't lose out on this debate, right? So I'm giving you kind of that history because even at that like the lowest, most technical, most like objective and neutral we would see level, we were sort of dealing with like sticky tape and twine and the fact that these are always like really inaccurate representations of the thing they are meant to capture. And then you extrapolate that into this sort of AI world. You extrapolate that into the stuff we call like our data about me. Why were you shown this ad? And it's way, 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 way fuzzier. And frankly, people care way less because we don't have a telco on the other side who's fighting in the other direction. So, these proxies don't get checked. The data is very bad. It's, schematized into sort of racialized and gendered categories that are super janky and like dated and replicate all of these like Sorry, I was about to swear because I'm American, but these silly histories. And so, I think that process itself needs, who gets to decide what is a representation of our dynamic reality? Who gets to decide the proxy? And that's where the debate should be, not whether I own the shit you made, the stuff you made up about me.
Yeah. And so you're saying it's not even my data, it's just has nothing to do with reality, with my reality as a being or as to how the world is.
Well, it's data they made up about you. Whether or not it has anything to do with your reality should be your call. Mm-hmm. Like, you are the authority on that, right?
Yeah.
Not Neuralink.
Yeah. And so what would, for you, be the answer to the dichotomy between state and company? Having listened to this.
Well, I don't know that I have an answer between the dichotomy between the state and company. I think they're blended right now. Mm-hmm. And if you look at the genesis, you see, network computation came out of deep military investment. I think, I don't have the number in front of me, but some research I did a handful of years ago on kind of IBM's role in military-era computing. The military investment was like 70, something like that, a large percentage of their total revenue for like 2 decades, mm-hmm. right? So, you're looking at an industry that was never really separate from governments in any meaningful way in terms of capital, in terms of incentives, in terms of like which research questions get answered and which don't. And I think it's never really been separate. We had the crypto wars in the 90s where we made a big scene about like, we won encryption, but then we gave the power to companies to decide where it was rolled out. They rolled it out to protect commerce. They sucked up all our data, and then Snowden revealed that data was going quietly, without a fight, right back to the government, right? Like, I don't know that, I think we square the circle by figuring out much more democratic means that don't confuse, an election every 4 years for real democratic oversight and governance.
Yeah. So it's both. It's mixed. It has always been the same sort of layer of power in many ways. But you're saying as well, big data is important. It's not, it's not that we have no use for it.
Well, finding ways of understanding ourselves and our world is really important, right? And data is a way of, doing that.
Yeah.
Making data, looking at data, thinking about data in relationship to what we want, using data, again, as a benchmark that can, help us gauge progress. All of those things are, they're fine, right? It's, who gets to create data about whom and what are the consequences, right? What type of, let's say, threat vector does that data represent? You have state statistics, those are fine. Census data can be really, really useful. It can also be used to classify who's us and who's them and then kill them, right?
Yeah, definitely.
And there's, how many people know René Camille? He was in the Dutch resistance. And he was part of an organization that blew up the records office, when during World War II. But what he did was there were punch cards for the census, right? Which would, and the punch cards were identifying, who's whom, where do you live, what, how many children do you have, are you Jewish, are you queer, etc. He removed the field that punched Jewish and saved thousands and thousands of lives, right? So are we talking about data there? Mm-hmm. What are we talking about there? Data. Right, like we're talking about data, but we're also talking about power. We're also talking about, the dynamics of like colonialism. If you look at some of the dynamics underwriting that period, dynamics of a will to empire. We're looking at the racialization. You're looking at the long history of anti-Semitism in Europe. Like all of those things are bound up there. And then we're looking at someone looking around and saying like, okay, what do I do, right? And in his case, it was
taking out the
deeply ethical sabotage.
Yeah. But that brings us to Signal as well. Many paths to that to your foundation. And why is it so important to to insist on encryption for private conversations for everybody, because you're getting a lot of flack from all sides for that. So why bother so much to do that?
Well, I mean, it's a way better life than like leaving at 3 p.m. in a Porsche after optimizing ad algorithms. That's one reason. Another, I mean, the norm of human communication for hundreds of thousands of years has been privacy, right? It's not, I see the historians' eyebrow raise, and you're like, okay, well, I'll let you come in.
No, I'm just contemplating what you're saying, because it has probably been since we had post letters and that sort of things, and we had and constitutions, where it's in the constitution that you cannot open somebody else's letter, for instance. And before that, if we two would decide to go to a place where nobody could listen to us, it would be very private, but on streets and stuff like that, everybody could hear each other, of course. But yes, you're right. You have a...
Okay. Yeah. All right. See, there we go.
Contemplating.
Right? It used to be the village could hear sometimes, and then the lady would tell the other guy, and then your dad would find out. Yeah. And that's how it went. But what we didn't have is this network of mass surveillance where our purchases, our payments, walking down the street and getting clocked by a clear view camera that you didn't consent to, because there's no such thing as consent for that kind of thing. Having your social network, when you start dating someone, when you start union organizing, when you stop, when you break up with your best friend, when you're go to an abortion clinic in the morning before work and don't want anyone to know, when et cetera, et cetera. None of that, that level of just pervasive observation, and then the sort of instrumentation of that data to manipulate and kind of shape behavior has not existed before, right?
No, well,
so
it sounds a little bit like
right
a little village, of course, and we liberated ourselves from those little villages where people would know literally almost everything about the things you mentioned. But
I mean, have you been on Instagram or like that's where it's not, or I don't know, had like a, maybe we liberated it from them, but I don't know.
No, well, I would say that if I read sort of all the novels about people living in villages, it's very oppressive. It's very, very narrow. And I think most people are really happy that they left. That period of history is over for a lot of people. And it's sort of small communities where everybody knows everything about you.
But the novel is a very particular form that grew up in a very particular time in a sort of urban context, and I'm not clear that would be the historical record of village life when it was trying to, there was a kind of industrial, kind of a codification of the nation state and industry at work during the rise of the novel.
But it was...
I do know that historically.
But it wasn't categorized and used like you rightly say at all. No. Of course not. No, there's a big difference between, of course. Huh? Even though I might be wrong or not, but it's totally different, of course, than 100 years ago. And so
anyway, like that was a long diversion to say, like, over the last 30 years, this sedimentary layers of mass surveillance infrastructure and an implicit right to classify and keep that data has grown up without any meaningful consent. And there's one technology we have to ensure meaningfully private communications or meaningful privacy on digital networks, and that is encryption, right? And Signal came up in an era. It's a miracle that Signal exists, and I'm so grateful to Moxie and Trevor and Tyler and the people who founded it and carried it on their backs with like no health insurance, not going on vacation, like taking every pager call when the server would go down and getting up and fixing. It's a huge amount of work, and it was work that started before the iPhone. It started when like Jabber and web clients were the competitor for chat. It was not, WhatsApp didn't exist. It was not a saturated market the way it is. And it was able to develop both a network effect, so a network of users, which is what makes a communication network valuable. And it was able to develop really innovative technology and a reputation around that technology, developing open source, being incredibly rigorous about how we thought about privacy and just absolutely uncompromising. If there was no way to do it, we were like, okay, we're going to figure out a way, but we're not going to do it the normal way that would leak data, right? And that remains the ethos of Signal. And those two things sort of combine to mean that we have this robust infrastructure that has the network effect, that has been tried and tested. Like any young InfoSec guy, if they could find a core vuln in the Signal protocol, and please keep trying, we love you, it's like kind of the immune system. But if they could do it, they would be offered a job anywhere instantly, right? There's a huge amount of incentive to have this kind of scrutiny and this engagement with Signal in our development work. None of that is something we could just replicate, right? So, I think Signal is vital infrastructure for any private communication, from boardrooms to militaries to, anything that we hear from these people all day. They use it, and there isn't a replacement. And if it went away, we wouldn't be able to recreate it.
No,
because you can't sell the first telephone. How do you enter a saturated net market that is governed by the network effect, where the norms are set by surveillance messengers, right? So I think every day about keeping that heartbeat going and protecting this thing that we built that, again, couldn't, it's not that we can't implement encryption on other systems. It's not that we can't build beautifully elegant communications technologies. It's that those affordances, that reputation and that scrutiny and the hardening that gives Signal, and that the robustness, and the fact that if you need to use Signal, it's already in place. You can call your friend, right? You don't have to, I think are hugely valuable, and I work to protect them every day. I believe that answers your question.
Oh, absolutely. But maybe again, and I think I understand you, but why would you say that it's so vital to have the right on private conversation? Why is that? Because you're saying it's a vital part of the infrastructure of our society. And yes, we do have sort of a right to it, but why is it not only our right, but why would you say it's vital? It's vital to our democracies or rule of law systems we like.
I mean,
what happens if it goes away, maybe?
Let's do a little exercise. I guess, does everyone want to close their eyes and do a visualization? I'm from LA. We do this at every talk we have. All right. Breathe in. The point here is, I think every one of the emails you've ever sent in your life just got published onto a server with a link that got sent to every one of your friends, every one of your bosses, the firm you're applying to, the grad school you're applying to, that girl you like at the coffee shop, everyone. And it has a GPT overlay, so they can search for summaries. They could search for themselves. It also has Control F. They can search for everything that's ever been said about them. Right? But it's like, shit, no one wants that, right? But that's what we're talking about, right? I doubt 75% of those relationships would survive without a blow. Maybe most of them would be gone because you've talked shit about everyone on that list to somebody else, and it's all in there, right? So how, I can extrapolate that point further, but I think I want it to hit in the gut, because those are the stakes. I walk you into a room as an interrogator and I say, I'm going to show this to your boss. I only need one of those emails, and you'll probably cave, right? Because God, we don't need another mess in our life. We have laundry to do. We have people to feed. I'm on health insurance, and if I lose my health insurance, my kid doesn't get diabetes medicine. These are existential stakes contained in really mundane language around data and around information and around is it okay to talk? Why would I care about what talk? No, these are the fibers of our connections with each other, our fibers of our connections with our ability to access resources, our ability to be meaningful participants in our world. And, without the ability to off-gas, without the ability to question, without the ability to say something kind of ugly and then feel bad about it and, be glad that that doesn't go in, like some permanent record of your being, we can't actually create healthy relationships or worlds. We certainly can't challenge power. We certainly can't, test nascent ideas and get them into a shape where we feel either that actually this is really bad and we're putting it in the drawer, or we want to move this on to conversation with others. We think this is actually a blueprint for new futures, right? And I think that messy space of actually being able to be human, actually being able to, question what is given, dries up completely if we don't have the ability to know that we have a little bit of grace, that we can speak privately to each other, that we can, that we can think privately, then speak privately, then do in a way. And I think, again, that goes back to the email example, right? Like, that's the stakes. If that kind of weird terror you feel, like the amygdala lights up and you're like, ah, like, that's it, right? We're people. Yeah. We want to be loved.
Yeah.
We want to be seen.
Yeah.
We want to be in relationship with community, and we'll do a lot not to lose that. And our intimate worlds can be easily leveraged to, I think, cut at the knees our ability to function, to coerce us, and to, I think, just put out the spark that can check power and create better worlds.
Greatly explained. Wonderful. You're saying many interesting things, but maybe two. I'm taking two out of it.
Open your eyes now.
But you're saying so it's impossible to challenge power with if everybody's data is open, is known to a few oligarchs, it's impossible to challenge power.
I'm like impossible. So I have an
Very
academic
difficult.
tendency to be like almost impossible, so I don't get like you can't use absolutes.
Okay.
But yeah, I mean, total surveillance is a neutralization of the ability to challenge surveillance to power, right? Like, total surveillance in the hands of those who have power over you means that there's no opportunity for challenge that I can, if you.
Yeah.
I don't feel totally comfortable with how pat that equation is, but yes, I think that's about.
Yeah, almost
what
at
I'm
least.
saying,
Yeah. And the other thing is that you're saying it goes much further actually than the rule of law, democracy, and sort of liberal democracy. It's about being human.
Yeah. I mean, we have one
That's
life
much further than
on
our
this magical
democratic
planet.
system. Yeah.
And democracy is one way of organizing it. Hopefully it's a good one, right? Like, we try to organize so that, in service of being human, in service of having a glorious life at this strange thing we're in. We're all going to die. Like, which is actually, which means make it big, make it cool, make it good. And like, democracy is a way of organizing, but the point is that life. Yeah. The point is, having people you love, having things you do, having, like, a feeling in the morning that you have, you're happy and you have resources, and that, you walk in the house and it's warm, right? Like, that's the thing all of it is in service of.
Yeah, and that sort of space where you can be nuanced and not be not be sort of exposed, is about being human and being able to be nuanced and being having a meaningful relationship and conversation with somebody else.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and that's what it's
we
taking.
We constitute relationships through communication.
And that's what it's taking away.
Yes.
Mass data.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Not very chill.
No. I'm just Yeah.
I mean, and taking that away, and then kind of shaping behavior, shaping norms. I think it's a very dangerous apparatus, a dangerous set of affordances in the hands of a dangerous configuration.
But then a lot of those tech people would say that, because of those mass information, mass data, we can have AI. Yeah, that's the only way.
I would say that too.
Yeah.
I just might.
Now we're
not
very
be-
lucky because you studied AI for quite a while. So we need to scrape everybody's data.
Got to. We
And-
gotta.
And yeah,
I'm sorry.
yeah. Because we need AI, because it's just sort of a revolution.
We need AI.
Yeah.
He said it.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, AI is innovation. AI is the printing press. AI is the wheel. AI, as Sundar Pichai said, is fire, analogous to the invention of fire. The gods handing, it's like fire, water,
Prometheus.
earth, air, AI.
Yeah.
Breathe in. Breathe out. So could we live without that? We absolutely need that. That is the key to sovereignty. That is the key to empire. That is the key to economic advantage. And that's also just means that you are not behind the times.
Yeah.
And being behind the times is embarrassing and shameful. And we need more tech talent into government because they need to get ahead of the times so they can actually understand how important this is instead of trying to regulate it out of existence. Because don't quote me. Quote me characterizing someone else. That'll go on Twitter, and I'll be fighting it for 2 years.
We're not gonna cut this part. Yeah. No, but that's right. That's the of course the
This is fire.
The reasoning behind it. Yeah.
That is the reasoning behind it, and that's the libidinal pull of the mythology of AI.
Sorry, that's the
Libidinal pull. Libido.
Okay, right. Yeah.
The force
Thanks.
of desire.
Yeah. It's not our mother, tongue, not my mother. But yeah, I understand.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah.
I also have a
don't worry.
California
Yeah,
accent. That's Deleuze.
But so your answer, I'm making your answer up again, but your answer would be, yeah, but we don't need that.
Well, I don't. Yeah, I think we don't need that.
Yeah.
I don't. I don't think creating proxies for our reality in the shape of data and using those to understand ourselves, and perhaps using different statistical methods to see what those proxies tell us in aggregate. Like that's not bad, right? But it's a question of who's using them, how, what are they being used to do, who has power, again, to define, who is defined, whose incentives are shaping all of that, et cetera, and so that putting that aside, yeah, I'm not like anti-data. I think
you said that before.
Anti-AI even, although AI is not a real. AI is a marketing term. I repeat this every time. It's never. It's not a technical term of art.
No.
It was invented in 1957, and I've told this before, but I love this part. Right.
Please go
It was
ahead.
invented by John McCarthy, who's a cognitive and computer scientist, and he invented it because he thought DARPA would give him grant money because it was a shiny term, and they were throwing money at sort of post-Cold War imaginary of sort of omniscience in the sky via sensors and AI. And academics will recognize this one. He invented it because he didn't want to use the term cybernetics because he didn't want to be Norbert Wiener's disciple. He wanted to be the father of his own thing. So he coined a new term, and now we are stuck with it. And it is described a ton of different things over, almost 80 years now that really don't look anything like each other. And so deep learning is the paradigm we're in now. And it was a paradigm that sort of was dead in the 2000s. When I came into tech, there was some work being done, but you would have like a paragraph in a machine learning textbook, and the paragraph would be like, we tried it in the 70s and 80s, it didn't really work. And then, there were people sort of working with web data, working with some of these approaches, but it was a marginal field. They like met in Holiday Inns, not like the Ritz. And it was the early 2010s with the publication of this paper, and this is a little bit schematic, but nonetheless, it was like this paper that brought all the kind of ingredients of this surveillance business model that has constituted these big tech platforms together with these old deep learning algorithms. So it was using, GPUs, figuring out, oh, we can do really interesting things with this parallelizable compute power. It was using huge amounts of data scraped from the web, which had been sort of deposited and produced there as a derivative of this surveillance business model. And it was using algorithms that were created in the late 1980s by Jan LeCun at Bell Labs, or kind of derivatives of those algorithms, so these deep learning approaches that had faded out of prominence then. And when you put them together, you could see step functions in performance as measured against common benchmarks, right? And what was interesting about that at first wasn't like, oh my God, it's intelligent. It was like, oh, these optimist-seeking algorithms from the 80s actually could be really useful in ad optimization when matched with our computational power and the massive amounts of data that we already have. And so Jan LeCun was immediately hired into Meta to do just that. Jeff Hinton and Ilya Stutzkever, who were the co-authors on the AlexNet paper, were immediately hired into Google. And this is part of the reason Google and Meta historically have had a lead in AI, because they absorbed a lot of that talent first because they had this ad business that they could use to sort of implement and test out these optimist-seeking algorithms that then got kind of branded AI around 2014 was when I clocked it, when they sort of settled on the term AI instead of machine learning or these other terms we were experimenting with as a sort of branding. And then, you'll note, like around 2015, 2016, this whole radicalization discourse happens around YouTube and the election. But in parallel, if you sort of go, put these together, you'll see a bunch of videos from Google Brain that are like tech talk videos, and that was happening inside as well, that are like, wow, look at the new sort of ad targeting and feed algorithm we're launching with AI, right? And so you're seeing this basically AI was a ad optimizing that they then realized was a key to diverse markets, because if you called it artificial intelligence and you trained them out, then it needed for medicine. You want intelligence there, and that's a market pathway. You need it for education, you need it for et cetera, et cetera. So it was basically a way to make more use of the resources that these companies already had sort of monopoly, power over, and to brand it with an incredibly beguiling narrative that is like catnip for a certain type of man.
Catnip?
Catnip is an herb that makes cats drugged and attracted to it.
Yeah. Okay, yeah. We don't. It's a difficult term. It doesn't maybe not even exist. It's different things. But you're saying if it's these large language models which are based on huge sort of amount of data, it's no reason. Yes, you can make nice things out of it, but there's no reason to sort of give up your privacy, your private conversations.
Yeah, I realized I didn't answer your question.
Yeah.
I just went into history that's really exciting. I'm one of those people who I'm like, shh, let me show you my special interest, and I get.
That's cool, but that's all right.
I think yes, and that AI is a product of mass surveillance. AI builds on mass surveillance, and AI is, not only requiring massive amounts of data for training and calibration purposes, but is producing new data that has the authority,
to determine manipulate your.
United Healthcare, right, was using an algorithm to determine whose claims were processed. They're not the only one, right? This is common practice. I know the Netherlands had a tragic scandal using a cruel algorithm for bureaucratic austerity, right? This is common,
Yeah. But then we have, of course, and that's not really solved again, because the Signal app, you cannot really make money at the moment with that sort of. It's a crucial service in our society to have a private conversation, but hey, it's really a pity we cannot make money with it, so it dies out.
Well, it's not dying. It's not dying. Signal is thriving. Signal is set for, I think it's set for the long term in part because the collateral consequences of this model are becoming really clear, right?
Of which model? Of the
surveillance business model that,
Okay.
like massive monopoly pulls in one jurisdiction at a time of geopolitical volatility when people are beginning to realize that that feeling in the pit of my stomach when I imagine everyone I love reading my emails when I was mean to them, like that expands to the political arena, that expands to the economic arena, and you're like, oh shoot, you're managing, like Amazon is managing our governments. Like I think there's a bit of a wake up, like a limb coming back awake after being asleep that's happening around stuff that, I'll bet many people in this room, if you're here, have been talking about for many years, right? But the stakes are kind of rupturing in real consequences. So yeah, Signal, we're seeing a lot of growth. We're seeing a lot of interest. We had the most surreal day of my professional life, perhaps, when the FBI came out recently and said, like, actually, everyone needs to use encrypted apps like Signal. They should not be sending SMS. And why did they say that? Because the backdoors that were put into the telephony systems to allow U.S. law enforcement to intercept.
NSA, basically.
Had been, as we always said they would be, accessed by China, right? And so we're beginning to see, like it's, none of this is new or even very novel, but again, it's, it's playing out. It's the find out era of mass surveillance.
It's a fuck around and find out.
Yeah.
We've gone through the fuck around and now we're in the find out.
We've been fucking around.
Yeah.
And finding out is is what time it is.
But but that doesn't. So you're right. And more people are using Signal, and maybe more and more people are realizing why it's important. But that's still no business model, of course. That's still no. So it's costing a lot. It's costing actually a lot of money.
It's very expensive. And when I talk, well, it's very expensive in the context of real life. It's very cheap in the context of tech. Actually, when I talk to tech people, I get congratulated on the leanness of Signal, on how because. Again, tech is expensive. It's, Amazon spent $53 billion on data center build-outs in 1 quarter for one region of the U.S. alone.
5.3 billion.
5.3, right? And so then the European Commission is like $500 million grant for AI, and I'm like, that's half a training run, right, for one of these large models. So, what is not, like, it doesn't mean they're paltry. $500 million is a huge amount of money, but then you look at the capital that's going into, this business model, and it's just out of, I don't know, I can't imagine that many zeros. And so, and that business model is, again, rooted, the taproot there is mass surveillance. So this is, AI producing more surveillance, AI demanding more data, and that's the incentive structure of that industry, right? Going back to the 90s, I can go into some of the history there, but basically either you monetize surveillance data in some form, you model it to target ads, or you train an AI model, or you're a data broker, or you provide services for those who do, right? Infrastructures and what have you. There is no business model for communications privacy.
No, and how should we go about in that respect? Is subscription the only model, or is that, what do you envisage for that?
Right now we have subscriptions, so everyone on Signal, I'm sure you've seen like a kind of please donate, a very unobtrusive, we try not to be annoying, but present. And then large donors, many of them from Silicon Valley, like interesting, a lot of the people who were close to these infrastructures are the people who are most afraid of them.
They've seen
just,
what they've
just
seen.
saying. And we're looking at things like endowment structures. We're looking at models like the Sovereign Tech Agency in Germany that enables long-term government appropriations without enabling government control, because we're very much that kind of way about that. And thinking through, are there new models we could actually create that would provide a revenue stream for private communications, that would enable a tech ecosystem that is not homogenous, monopolized, and reliant on this very dangerous mass surveillance paradigm.
Mm-hmm. And you're saying, so we're sort of in the find out period. I like your what you said about a limb coming back alive. If you lean in it too long, you use it again, you suddenly feel like, hey, there's something in it. But also we find out because one of the biggest tech giants joined up with Donald Trump, of course. We're finding out that it's really, really getting to a point where oligarchs are sort of not only a Russian phenomenon, but suddenly a Western phenomenon as well.
Yeah. I mean, that's not that new. We talk about like the threats to democracy, and yes,
We did.
but it's so odd that conversation never talks about like Citizens United, which was 2 Supreme Court decisions in the U.S. that basically allowed unlimited campaign donations anonymously, right? Like that, So yeah, this is not a new road, but yeah, power recognizes power.
Yeah.
Right? Like power
Yeah.
reproduces it. I don't, and tech is vastly powerful, and, the apex of the federal government also vastly powerful in the U.S. So, yeah.
So how do you look upon the possibility of Elon Musk becoming a Minister of Efficiency?
I mean, yeah, he's doing it. I mean,
You think so? Yeah.
I mean, I don't, look, I think it's gonna be pretty tricky over the next years. I don't know what there isn't a precedent for a lot of this.
No, that's right.
There isn't a
Uncharted
legal
waters. Yeah,
basis for a lot of the powers that are being discussed.
Yeah.
But I think, people need to wake up and recognize, like, there's no ref, and God's not paying attention. Like, there's no
referee, you mean?
There's no adult to authority, like they broke the rules, like, okay, like, what is the game we're playing? And they're very good at it, right? They're very good at it. So we'll see.
Yeah, so God help us, but he's not looking.
We have no evidence, right? And again, there's no liberal referee who's tallying up who did who followed the rules best at the end, and then you actually win. That's not how, power is power.
Yeah.
Law, what is, power makes laws, laws don't make power.
And I'm getting depressed, but that's
Wait,
partly
that's
partly why
no,
we're
this is
why
not
we're here, isn't it?
depressing.
No?
You know what's depressing is
No?
delusion. It's like wiping the map so it looks nicer for us.
Yeah.
It's like pretending that everything's okay because emotionally we don't want to look at it, but then our strategies are bad, right? Then we think there's a ref when there's not. Then we lead down these sort of tidy little liberal roads, and they're dead ends, and then we're here, right?
Yeah.
So I think, like, for me, this is bracing and actually optimistic, because at least we're saying things that have needed to be said, and there's a broad conversation about them, without which nothing can ever happen, right? So I've said, like, I don't want to plant the seeds of optimism in rocky soil, right? Like, we actually have to know what we're looking at. We actually have to take the time to carry that weight and actually grapple with it if we're going to have a strategy worth anything in this context.
And
that's optimism for me.
what would you recommend beside sort of the right to privacy and maybe Signal as a part of that?
Well,
Against
I mean, the right to privacy is infrastructure, right? The story isn't really about privacy. The story is about what are the human rights work that can continue when people, say in Uganda, who are being granted asylum in the UK, in a place where US evangelicals have pushed for laws that now criminalize being gay by death. How do you get them out, right? You send documents over Signal between Uganda and the UK until all those documents are filed and those people can get on a flight. That's the story, right? Not, and so that work needs to continue. And yes, privacy preserving technology is a core infrastructure. It's a foundational condition for that work. It's a foundational condition for building more labor power, which will be necessary, as history shows us. That's one of the few countermeasures to this kind of oligarchic constellation of power, right? I organized at Google. That's a pretty big adversary when you're doing labor organizing.
Yeah.
And we all organized on Signal.
you organized a walkout and a strike, and
I was one of many organizers. Yeah. But the way we communicated was on personal devices, so we didn't have administrative controls on them that meant that Google had access to our phone, or could see our messages, and we had strict security protocols using Signal. And we would not have been able to do that. We wouldn't be talking about it. It wouldn't have happened, right? if we hadn't had that, right? So again, the story isn't about Signal. That's not, the walkout isn't the Signal story, but the enabling conditions of that was the ability to talk to each other, the ability to have a whistleblowing network where we had like many hops between the person who accessed something and how you accessed it, and then, the people who were passing it blindly through this sort of relay, so that the person who was providing it to journalists or what have you didn't actually know where it came from, and so it was much harder to trace, right? And all of this was happening over infrastructures that were necessary for anything to have happened, for the real story to be told, for the real work to be done.
You could easily say that, of course, and you've heard that said to you many times, but you could easily say that, of course, of terrorist organizations, the same thing you're describing now. So you could say that, a terrorist could organize it the same way and could try to blow up innocent people, or because they could use the same methods, of course.
You could say that.
And would you not agree?
Yeah, a terrorist can drive the car on the road.
Yeah.
A terrorist, there's a lot of things that they have access to that we have access to. We're all people. And I'll say that most of the human rights organizations that I talk to who rely on Signal that we would sort of champion in this room are criminalized in one jurisdiction or another, right? So yeah. Right?
Yeah.
Yes, it's a technology that has to either be available to everyone or it works for no one.
It's like everybody. I think the comparison to the car is very good. So everybody can drive on the road and do bad things with or good things. It's a necessary thing to move around in society. So
yeah. Well,
yeah.
I'm all for like walkable car-free cities, and I love
course,
Amsterdam, but that's a good analogy. I've done another analogy like with a pen, right? Mm-hmm. So, you imagine there's a crime. I'm a crime person, and I committed a crime, and then you come into my office and you find my stuff, and the police inspector is like, got the tool, and goes to, I don't know, let's say this is Bic.
This is the Balie. This pen is the Balie.
It's from Japan, and it's very nice. And goes to the factory that makes this and says, like, look, a crime person was using this to document their crimes, and I need you to tell me everything written with it. No, it's terrorism. You can't. There's no laughing here. This is terrorism, and it's serious. And are you okay with terrorism's writing with your thing you produce? And of course, they would look at him and be like, "You are out of your mind." And you could make this so it would record everything, right? You put an accelerometer in it. You have to charge it all the time. It's annoying. It's kind of heavy, right? Like that could be a way we make this guy. But we don't, and we would never expect that this is the sort of key to unlock, criminality somehow, right? But somehow every single communications apparatus that we built, related to network and communication, there's an expectation of access, right? And there's an expectation of some sort of complicity if access is denied. So I'll leave that on the table, but I don't think. Again, it also gets back to just the flat facts of mathematics, right? You can't make a backdoor that only the good guys can get in. Either everyone can get in, a la Salt Typhoon, a la the interception points in the US telecoms network that have just been exploited, right? Or it's actually secure. That's just it. There's no nuance there. Like Brussels is not going to nuance this. They can try, but that's literally just what it is, and that's been true for as long as encryption has been true.
Yeah, that explains it very concisely. I think we could discuss many more things, but I'm looking at the clock, the red one over there as well. And I want to give, as we always do, the audience the possibility to come in with some questions. For now, I'm not closing off the evening, because for now, thank you very much for this part of the conversation. Rosalie has a microphone, and we might have some light in. Yeah, thanks to the technicians. There might be some questions or some remarks or some there. So
gentleman over here, that's right, who has one. Please.
Hi, Meredith. Thank you for coming. I have a two-sided question for you. So what's key to getting the wider public, I'm talking civilization on a global scale, interested in preferring open, secure, non-predatory tech systems and platforms like Signal, when they are so drawn to locked in even, and often blinded by the opposite kind, which are easy yet harmful, the other platforms? Also, second part, is that required to protect our democratic values in society, even when such a large part of humanity seems ignorant, naive, careless, or in many cultures, suppressed?
Thank you for that question. I want to push on it a little bit because I don't think people are dumb. And I don't think people are even complicit. I don't think we have a meaningful choice. And so we get back to, like, if you go to your university, right, are you able to choose meaningfully open technology? No, they have a Microsoft license and you're using outlook.edu of some kind, right? You know, I walk down the street, that Clearview camera, I don't have a choice in that Clearview camera. And the network effect and the reality of communication networks that, you know, we don't want 50 different telephones and have to know which of our friends are on each, you know, different interoperable system that doesn't interoperate with each other. Like, we want to just talk to our friends, right? And so I think, you know, there are kind of natural monopolies that these business models formed around that make it very difficult to switch. I think that in many cases we don't have choices if we want to participate in the world in a full extent as social, economic, political beings. And I think that when people do have a choice, we see them obviously preferring privacy, right? When they pick up Apple, it may not be private, but 999% of people in the world don't have the, you know, the skills or the time to validate Apple's claims. And meanwhile, Apple can't find enough wall space in Williamsburg, Brooklyn to put up big posters saying they're private, which is clear. There's a value there. People want it. People want to choose that. We need to make it a choice that's actually available and not conflate coercive tactics and sort of normative standards set by these companies with people's sentiment and desire. So that is my answer there. And I think you get people involved by, you know, offering them better choices, by validating those feelings, by saying, like, you're not stupid that you use TikTok or Gmail, right? Like, TikTok's where all your classmates are and you wouldn't be able to know their jokes if not. And, like, literally you only have 4 years in that school in your whole life and it's a beautiful time. Why do you want to alienate yourself from their jokes? That's not a shallow choice. That's like deep social, you know, belonging. You're not stupid. Here are the consequences, and here are, you know, like, some alternatives we could push for. So that would be my approach. I really appreciate that question.
Thank you so much. Meredith, I hope that you'll forgive me when I say that there is a comparison between Telegram and Signal. And Pavel Durov is also in Paris, so even more comparisons. And of course, the whole thing with Telegram is that people felt safe communicating on it, also on things that were definitely criminal. And he's being also held because he did not want to hand over information. So where does the comparison start and where does it end? Because is it not, if you just compare yourself more or less with a road or just providing the infrastructure, yes, people can have different intention on the infrastructure. Still, on every road, there is sometimes a police block in order to stop the cars and inspect them. So in what respect should Signal allow opening up of data in order to see what is in the boot of the car?
Yeah, to no extent is the answer to the last part of that question. And then let's get to the Telegram comparison, because this is one that, sorry, kind of haunts me. There's very, very little similarity between Telegram and Signal, full stop. Part of the similarity is we look at it on our phones. So from an experiential level, people collapse them. And then we have this problem where anything that touches a computer becomes a platform and becomes kind of conflated into this big bucket. But Telegram is a massive barely moderated social media network. They allow huge broadcasts, so you can go viral on Telegram, you can reach millions and millions of people. They allow locations sharing, and they have a directory, so it's not just the people in my contacts list that I've met individually who I can find on Telegram. I can meet strangers, I can create networks of interest through these channels. That's constitutively a social media network, and it is unencrypted. They have actually, pretty bad data practices. On the side of Telegrams, they have DMs, and you have an option if you want to make one-to-one DMs encrypted, but very few people exercise that option, is what I understand, and how defaults work, right? So that's Telegram. They have the data, they store the data under the DSA, they're classified as a platform, maybe a very large platform, they're fighting that, and they have to give that up under that classification. Signal is an interpersonal communications app. We actually go out of our way not to build social media features. We could get a lot more virality, we could get a lot more reach if we did. But you can't meet new friends on Signal unless somebody you know on Signal introduces you. You can't go viral on Signal, and you can't do location sharing or many of the things that were, I believe, part of the criminal case in France, although they're a little confusing with that, right? So these are very different paradigms. They're actually very, very different approaches, and the affordances and harms they enable are very, very, very different. So Signal goes out of our way to collect as close to zero data as possible, right? It's very difficult to do that when all the norms, all the tool chains, all the libraries assume you're collecting data. But we also go out of our way not to create new harm surfaces, right? Not to allow people to sort of, find criminal buddies on Signal and sort of, pull them into something. I'm hand waving a little bit here because there's actually a lot of very precise research on how these things work, on how people find networks, on how people find victims, et cetera, on, platforms. I'm not speaking to that specifically here. But the way Signal is built and the purpose it serves is communication between individuals, not a social media platform. So I don't think the comparison is actually useful in thinking through the question of private communications, because Telegram is not a communications app. It's a social media broadcast app that has a lot of features and a lot of things about it that are very dissimilar to Signal. Now, if the question is just like cops should be able to see data because sometimes they need to see data, well, I just disagree, particularly in a paradigm of encryption. When you're not just talking about a blockade on one road with some cars, the analogy kind of breaks down. You're talking about an inspection point that anyone who can figure out how to get into that inspection point can also use to view data. Meaning that's the cops, that's Chinese hackers, that's people who want to steal your money, that's whoever else would be able to also use that backdoor in the encryption algorithm.
And maybe to use the comparison again, if you could say, if the police would come to Signal and would say, take out Yuri Albrecht because he's a criminal, he's done this, that, and that, could you take him out? So he's not allowed to use your system. So they don't use your data, but they just come to you and point out that a user who is a criminal and should be taken out of, should not be using your servers or your Signal. Is that's a little bit maybe like
So
the
can we
police
remove accounts from the system?
Yeah,
I mean, technically we can. Like anyone who runs a service like this could. Mm-hmm. But again, if they brought us your name, we wouldn't know who you were, right? We don't log names.
No, so you don't. So even if the police would come and say this is a criminal using it for, you cannot take him out because you wouldn't know which is which, whom's whom.
If they said if this is Julia Albrecht, take him out, we would say we have no way to map the name Julia Albrecht to an account on Signal, and thus can't find this person. No. Right? Yeah. And you can go signal.org/bigbrother is where we post all the subpoenas that we are forced to comply with that we unseal. And what you can see there are two really important things. One is that we're not able to give any data, like they're blank pages. Two is how much data everyone else is able to give, which is shown by the long, long lists of what are requested.
Interesting. Yeah, there's another question over there, the lady over there. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you for your leadership. And I have a question about why interconnectivity and interoperability between different networking services is so difficult in the messaging app world. Because in telecommunications, we can communicate across different mobile phone subscriptions and across different network subscriptions. And it would be so fantastic if my Signal subscription could work with to WhatsApp and I don't have to join the other groups. But it doesn't seem to work. So what is the obstacle here? And is that also because encryption would be like hampered by that?
Well, I mean, I think historically telephone networks were built from the ground up on interoperable standards, although there's an interesting history of like Europe's dominance in telephony that then sort of, but nonetheless, that was an intention from the ground up and the infrastructure supports it, and that's not true of the messaging services that we have now, and nor is there any incentive for most of the large players to want to share their networks and share their data. I think for us as Signal, what is very difficult here is that our privacy bar is up here. We protect, as much as we can. Again, we, deploy encryption. We don't know who's sending a message to whom. We don't know your profile photo. We don't know your contact list. We don't know, obviously we don't know the contents of your messages and calls, but the list goes on and on. Like it's a massive list of what we don't know and a vanishingly short list of what we do. How do we ensure a provider on the other side is also meeting that bar? And that bar isn't just promises. How do we audit that code? We're open source. We're scrutinized by a really diligent community. Is their code also scrutinized by a community? And there's technical issues with interop. There's also organizational issues. Who gets to deplatform a user? Who receives a law enforcement request? If I'm talking to you, you're on WhatsApp, I'm on Signal, and then WhatsApp's algorithm flags something as, as, I don't know, harmful, and they deplatform you. But there are actual complexities because we're trying to layer this on top of sort of cemented systems. And in our case, because we're trying to layer it on top of systems that are generally built with no privacy in mind and with mass data collection. And, in the case of WhatsApp, they use the Signal protocol to protect message content. But they're also, they collect metadata and they're yoked to Meta, the company, which has massive amounts of data and an interest in using it. So those are the dynamics that when I think about messaging interop, make it very tricky for me from Signal's position.
So thank you very much for everything you've been saying. I'm a big fan, I think, of everything that you've been saying so far. Today at the University of Amsterdam, we had the 4th day of a strike, and a lot of the communication went through Signal. And also today we're here with some students from the University of Amsterdam, and together we're fighting the fact that we have no choice but to be using big tech. So in that sense, I'm a big fan. But there's also a but, and it kind of like connects with what the other question was raising. You're talking a lot about the danger of centralization in the beginning. Why do you not work for the Matrix Foundation? And I'm sure you're very eloquent. You're probably better at explaining what Matrix is, right? And how it differs from Signal. But basically, the Fediverse, like to have everyone, run their own server. Matrix is one of those options. And if then, there's probably good reasons why you don't work for the Matrix Foundation because of the answer you just gave. But would you maybe in the future be ready to say Signal's code is open source, and we're going to allow people to run their own Signal server to really decentralize what you've been doing so far?
I love the vision. I love decentralized power. I want to, and more power to Matrix and everyone who's fighting, for more privacy, which is really, it's upstream. So this is not, this is not me dragging anyone. I think, decentralized protocols and decentralized servers aren't necessarily decentralized power. And I think Matrix is doing everything they can. But the cheap example would be something like Bitcoin, where it's decentralized, yeah, but the Winklevoss twins own most of the mining servers, right? So I do think we need to have a political economic lens on some of that conversation. That's a bit of an aside. When it comes to Signal, look, we have to run real-time communication globally. You have to be able to make a call from Bangkok to Kingston, Jamaica, and it needs to go through, which means we need to have edge presence in every one of those jurisdictions, and that needs to be able to stream video, and that's pretty high bandwidth. That's very expensive. It costs about $50 million a year to run and maintain Signal. That's bandwidth, that's servers, that's all of it. That's staff, and we could ask people to run their own servers, but probably what we mean by running their own servers is paying the AWS bill, right? So we're not actually getting out of centralization. We're just distributing costs in a way. They can do that, sure, but are they gonna be doing that for edge presence on like Amazon's, instance near Bangkok? Do we have people there? I don't know, probably not. Okay, well then we can have a little bit of volunteer, but we patch it in with our own servers, but oh shit, we found a vulnerability. Okay, who's pushing that patch? Everyone now, push it. Okay, shit, the guy in Greece, he's on vacation for 6 months, right? Like, it has to, like the function of Signal is to be robust and always reliable and always private and provide that level of rigorous service. That's the thing we're trying to do. We recognize that we're operating in a deeply imperfect ecosystem we want to change, but at the moment, those problems I named, we're not actually talking about challenge. No one's running a server in their garage anymore. And if they are, I honestly probably don't want to run on it, given, the paradigm. We're talking about shifting costs. I think that's great. You can also donate to Signal if you want us to just pay the AWS bill. And we're talking about sort of distributing kind of responsibility through volunteer or quasi-volunteer, but that can actually be worse for privacy and security if you don't have clear and rigorous processes in place to make sure that that person knows that the most important thing, the second a patch needs to be deployed, is deploy that patch. It doesn't matter where you are, right? And so those are the stakes of that conversation. And I think we need to get real precise on what we mean by decentralizing power and not allow sort of technocratic definitions that look only at sort of the mechanism and don't look at political economy to cloud our view of where we are and where we need to go.
Great question, great answer. I'm afraid we're looking for the last question.
No, that woman with the scarf right there has been raised. Yeah, you.
That woman with the scarf. The woman with the scarf with the orange thing underneath, isn't it? Yeah.
I really like your scarf, by the way.
Yeah.
Thank you. I'm a big fan of you. I also wrote you an email if you want to look at that. My name is Paula.
Thank you. It's not always me in my inbox, but I'll take a look.
I saw that you visited Félix Guattari's grave the other week, and I also saw that you are rereading Anti-Oedipus, and I love Deleuze and Guattari, and I wanted to ask why you read it.
Oh, on my Instagram. I did. My best friend and I visited it, and it was really sweet. It's so weird that he had a family. I'm reading it because I'm trying to wrestle with the emotional and maybe like desirous nature of privacy theoretically, right? What is it that privacy is protecting? What are the what are the rejections of classification that we could sort of trace back to a Deleuzian? I'm theorizing. It's present progressive. I'm working through it, but like many people who turn to historical materialism, I'm like, now we need something that deals with affect. And just thinking through, I'm writing that talk for CCC and looking at kind of theories of love, theories of desire, and the idea that sort of privacy as a discourse, particularly in jurisprudence, is like weirdly linked to these concepts. It's who's intimacy is considered protected by privacy and whose intimacy is not considered protected by privacy, whether it be queer love or interracial love, which types of loves are acceptable and which are policed by the state. How does classification play into that? And how do we think about a more collective version of privacy that makes room for a kind of rejection of classification and this sort of haunting of intimacy and love in the privacy debate that is disavowed almost completely when we get into the technology sector. So that's why I'm reading it, and that's what I'm working on.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for coming along to the Balie. Thank you, Rosalie. And Adyen is, of course, many thanks to them. But first and foremost, thank you very much, Meredith Whittaker, for coming, for sharing your thoughts, for speaking out loud.
Thank you.
A warm applause. And not only that, and for building up Signal, of course, as well. Yeah.
Thanks goes to so many people that I'm honored to work with. I'm just the face. So thank you all. It's been a delight. Thank you.